Okay, this is the presentation for rebuilding Japan after World War II. Let's just jump right into it. Next slide. Destruction. After Japan's surrender, Japan's economy and government were devastated. The country's infrastructure, transportation, communications, sewage, water, and electric systems was demolished. Industries and farms were destroyed, and the emperor was exposed as a mere mortal and not a god. Next slide. This is a picture of one of the Japanese cities. It's often, I would assume that it would be either Nagasaki or Hiroshima after the atomic bombs, but with the level of just regular, normal, every day, but normal bombing, um, it was pretty heavy. So this could be a number of cities in point of fact. Next slide. Same, you're seeing the destruction here of the bombing and things like that. So next slide. The occupation. The U.S. had a plan to occupy and rebuild Japan in a way that would guarantee the country would not pose a military threat to others in the future. General Douglas MacArthur, who had commanded the Allied forces in the Pacific, was sent to oversee Japan's restoration. After World War II, the U.S. occupied Japan from 1945 to 1952. Next slide. MacArthur. General MacArthur ordered Japan's military to be disbanded and closed all weapons factories. He also directed that government and military leaders involved in World War II were brought to trial and punished. In addition, MacArthur helped Japan install a new democratic government. Next slide. This is General Douglas MacArthur on the left and the Japanese Emperor Hirohito on the right. Hirohito was kept in power, sort of, as kind of a figurehead or a head of state, to use the term, whereas mainly ceremonial powers. But it was also because the Japanese people recognized him, and it would make it easier for them to transition to this new style of government. Next slide. Government. MacArthur decided that Japan would be a constitutional monarchy in order to preserve the emperor's role in the country's culture. He wrote Japan's constitution, the MacArthur Constitution, which is still considered one of the most democratic documents in the world today. Japanese citizens were granted many of the same rights as American citizens, so he modeled it heavily after the United States Constitution, but also took some elements of the British Constitution, being that they have a monarchy there, so he needed some points of reference from that. Next slide. These are elections in Tokyo in 1952. Reparations. Japan's constitution also prevents the country from declaring war or fighting with other countries unless they are attacked first. After signing the new constitution, the Japanese government pledged to pay reparations, which is money to pay for the damage they had caused, to the countries that they had harmed during World War II. The Japanese were also not allowed to rebuild their military in any way. As time went on, they were allowed to progressively build up a kind of a self-defense military, but most of their big military stuff was just U.S. We still have bases there. So, next slide. This is a page out of Japan's constitution, written in Japanese, which I can't read, so we'll just move along. Next slide. Support. The United States, 1, loaned the Japanese money, 2, gave them manufacturing technology, and 3, gave them natural resources. The U.S. invested several billion dollars into rebuilding Japan. Not all Americans supported the expense, but the government had its reasons to help Japan rebuild. The U.S. government knew that a friendly Japan would be a valuable trading partner in the future. Next slide. Communism. The U.S. government also wanted a democratic government to counteract the spread of communism in southern and eastern Asia. Communism was getting more and more popular in China, Korea, and Vietnam. The U.S. government saw this as a threat to democracy and desired to keep the Japanese from being drawn to communism. Next slide. Economy. The United States' efforts, coupled with a strong Japanese work ethic, led to a boom in Japan's economic growth. Japan now has one of the most powerful industrialized economies in the world. America's occupation and MacArthur's rebuilding of Japan has had a positive, lasting effect. Today, on April 28, 1952, Japan became a fully sovereign, which means independent, nation. Today, the country has one of the most stable democratic governments in the world, and the U.S. and Japan have remained close allies and trade partners since the 1950s. This is also true of the other primary country we fought during World War II, which is Germany. So, next. And this is a current picture of the city of Tokyo, and you can see how, modern and large the city is. And bear in mind, this is also a city that suffered a lot of damage during the war, and their economy has allowed them to rebuild pretty substantially. That should be it.